introduction. It's amazing, just hearing you kind of recite a few things that I've been fortunate enough to do as a journalist. I can remember being in high school and having a guidance counselor who looked at me and my mom. We were called in for a meeting one afternoon, and she said, "You were never going to amount to anything," because I was struggling with a co-op placement and it wasn't working out. And then a couple years after that, being at university and just thinking, I've got no hope. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get an interview with the Toronto Star, let alone a job. I was told again and again and again, "You're not what we're looking for. Good luck in the future." Wound up as a freelance writer coming out of university and slept in my car going to do assignments. So if there's one quick takeaway, it's like if you feel like you've got a burning desire in you to do something, a calling, don't give up on it, go for it. And for me, it took a good 7 or 8 years after I finished university before I finally figured out, what a good fit for me was. But I had so many people tell me no, so many people tell me you're not what we're looking for, indirectly say you're not good enough. I can't tell you how often that happened. So if that's happened to any of you as students trying to figure out where you're going to wind up after, no, you're not alone with that. That, resilience is something that I think I learned immediately coming out of school. I'm grateful to talk about this, about both the trial in London that I covered with other terrific journalists, and also kind of speak about hockey in a broader context and why this case matters. We've all heard the saying that hockey is Canada's game, and that it really reflects who we are as Canadians. And the rinks across our country, we're told, are these places of belonging and community and pride. We've seen commercials, Tim Hortons commercials, year after year of hockey players driving Zambonis around, of new Canadians who are struggling to find their way in this cold, unforgiving country during the winter, and how they find a sense of connection at a hockey rink, right, over a double-double or a coffee often. And it's against that backdrop that I've been trying to do reporting on what are really uncomfortable truths. Stories about what's happening with hockey and kind of how we got here. My reporting on sexual misconduct allegations actually started before I heard about this case in London. 4 days before Christmas in 2020, my son, who was 14 at the time, was diagnosed with cancer. His name's Carter, and he started chemotherapy on New Year's Day in 2021. And I can remember just feeling like the floor had fallen out from underneath me. My whole family was in crisis, and we lived day to day thinking, how long is Carter going to be here for? And when he was in hospital at Sick Kids, my wife and I took shifts because it was during COVID, so only one of us could be at the hospital at a time. And when I was with him one night, I remember just looking for a distraction. And so I'm looking on the internet at sports stories and such, and I see a story from Chicago that a radio station had published about a former Chicago Blackhawks player who was not named, who had sued that team for in a personal injury lawsuit, alleging that he'd been sexually assaulted by his coach during the 2010 Stanley Cup playoff run. And at the time, I thought, well, that's an interesting story. I was curious why no other media in hockey picked it up and were asking questions. But I thought, this is important, and I'd like to know more about this. And so I dug in and started doing more reporting on it. And at the time, it was a distraction. I was sitting in Sick Kids many days, and it was a good story. And what I liked about it it was a horrible story, obviously, but it was a good story because no other journalists were willing to go there. I knew there was an uncomfortable truth there that needed to be uncovered. And so through October of 2021, I probably did close to 50 stories for TSN and CTV News about this case. And finally, there was enough public pressure, because as you do each additional story, more sources come forward and corroborate what this player was saying. I had former players on that Blackhawks team on the record talking about how everybody knew what was happening in that locker room. And finally, in October 2021, a law firm hired by the Blackhawks published a report that corroborated the allegations that this player had made. And the morning after, this player, whose name's Kyle Beach, agreed to come on TSN And we ran in our Sports Center evening newscast an interview with him for 28 minutes, uninterrupted, no commercials. We told Sportsnet, which is our diehard competition, you guys can use as much or nothing of this as you want. We told all the US networks, anything you want to use. It's all because we thought this story's in the public interest. People need to know about this. And from that day forward, that was October 21st, 2021. It's now November 2025. A week has not gone by in 4 years that people have not messaged me with credible stories about sexual misconduct and abuse and maltreatment in Canadian sports. For 4 years, every week, and I'm not exaggerating, I've got 2 tips today, like on my way to Western, from people who've reached out. Often when people connect with me, it's because they want me to do reporting on their stories. But I'm also hearing from people across Canada who just want to share what's happened to them. You know, people who've been hurt by family members, who've been hurt in the church, who've been hurt in the military or at work, and they just reach out because they want to tell somebody about what they've gone through. And I'll be honest, that can be a heavy load to carry at times. I've got 2 kids at home, and my kids have heard stories about sexual assault every day for 4 years in our family home. And in truth, I need to actually do a better job of separating and having some boundaries for my family. This case in particular, I was in May 2022, I was in Belgrade, Serbia, and I was working on a feature story on a Canadian soccer player named Milan Borjan. And it was just like a traditional sports feature. You know, the story of somebody who'd been raised in Belgrade in the middle of the Balkans War. His family had found a new life in Canada, and he was then a star on Canada's national men's soccer team. So it was a great story. And I remember in Belgrade, kind of running around that city trying to find locations for filming, and my phone's going off, and I don't recognize who's trying to call me, and just don't answer. And finally on the 5th attempt, I answer the phone, and this source is saying to me, there's a case in London, Ontario that you really need to take a look at. It's escaped the public's attention to this point, and it's something that, that Canadians need to know about. And so from Belgrade, I reached out to the court officer in London, who was extremely unhelpful, but every day for a week I called back and tried to find somebody who actually would help me with this, and finally managed to get a copy of this statement of claim. And the statement of claim read like a horror story. A young woman who was referred to in court documents as EM alleged that a number of members of Canada's 2018 World Junior Hockey team had sexually assaulted her in a hotel room in London in the summer of 2018, following a Team Canada golf and gala event that was held here in London. Earlier in January 2018, the players on that team had won a gold medal at the World Juniors in Buffalo, and this was months later. It was a chance for the team to celebrate and party and revel in the victory. And I remember calling my colleagues at TSN and saying, like, this is really big, like on a couple fronts. For starters, just because of the enormity of the allegation that was made, but also because TSN, the company that I work for, we broadcast the World Juniors. TSN, like my company, makes many millions of dollars over the years broadcasting this event. And here was a story that threatened to blow all of that up. And I'll be honest, I wondered, like, what's TSN's reaction going to be? And I can tell you with conviction, the only thing that I was ever told by my boss was find the truth. Do your job. We'll figure out the rest later. Make sure that you're right. Take your time. We don't care if somebody else beats us on this story. This story is not about who's first. It's about being right. It's about giving everybody a chance to comment. Do it the right way. So we did. And that story broke on May 26, 2022. And the reaction was pretty immediate. A member of Parliament from Quebec named Sébastien Lemaire talked about the story on the floor of the House of Commons, and asked, like, how is it that this is happening? How do we not know that Hockey Canada has made a settlement like this? And it wasn't long before kind of a ripple effect started. Sponsors walked away from Hockey Canada. The public's trust in the organization was shattered. You know, parents were wondering, what kind of organization are we paying into for our kids? And the federal government actually responded too, freezing funding for Hockey Canada. This all happened at a time when, and is still the case today, the public's trust, your trust in journalists, is as low as it's ever been. There's all kinds of forces around the world that are sowing confusion and skepticism, you know, promoting disinformation, false narratives, propaganda. At the same time as that's happening, our newsrooms are being stripped down, right? The London Free Press, your local paper, is not the paper that it was 20 years ago. They don't have the resources, they don't have the reporters, they don't have the editors, they don't have the legal teams that once existed. And the rise of fake news and influencers is happening. All of you young people, I would bet that most of you, if not all of you, get your news on Instagram or an app like that or TikTok and not reading the paper or watching the evening news. And so, you know, this I saw it right away. This was an opportunity through this story to kind of connect with readers, with viewers, with the public, and talk to them about how we do our jobs. And so when I was doing, often after the story broke, I'd be asked, will you talk about the story? And I did, but I made sure in all these interviews to point out how we do our jobs as journalists. When someone's calling us with a tip, even if it's a credible tip, that doesn't mean that it immediately goes on social media, right? We have a real rigorous vetting process for reporting at TSN. And I would actually put up our work in this respect against the Globe and Mail and CBC and the Toronto Star and the heavyweights of mainstream journalism. We talk about whether stories are in the public interest, right? And if it doesn't meet that bar, if it's only sensational, we don't report it. We talk about whether a public good can come out of doing this and whether powerful people running organizations might be held accountable because of our reporting. And if it doesn't meet that bar, we don't go forward. And then even if it does meet that bar, there are some stories that are stories that we should pursue that we don't because we don't have the resources to do it. So we also have a list of stories like which is the most important today. And I promise you there are stories I could share where you'd say that's clearly in the public interest that we just can't get to right now because we don't have the resources or the time. Coming into this kind of reporting as well is challenging. I have a journalism degree from Ryerson, now at TMU, and I've had no experience in how to report on sexual assault allegations. I'm a sports reporter, right? I did foreign reporting. And it's hard because I've made mistakes. At the time this story broke, I got a tip about another sexual assault allegation involving the 2003 Canadian World Junior team in Halifax. And I reported in that story that a young woman, that there was a video that existed, and I talked to 4 people who had said that they'd seen this video. And I reported that the video showed, according to my sources, the video showed a young woman who was not conscious, who was, and these players on the Canadian team had sex with a woman who was not conscious. And people who know this subject better than I do will tell you that that language couldn't be more wrong, right? No one who is not conscious can have sex with anyone. And I should have used the language, better language. I should have reported that these players had allegedly sexually assaulted her. And conservatively, I would guess I got 400 messages from people who scolded me and said I should be embarrassed and said that I had no business reporting in this space if I couldn't use the right language. And they were right, and it sucked. And I made a point to respond to every one of those people and apologize and say I'd work to do better. And you know, again, that I was sorry if the reporting had hurt them. And it's interesting, none of the people after I responded came back with anything close to anger or hate. You know, everybody who responded to me after my response were like, hey, thanks for getting back to me. I didn't think you would. Appreciate it. And thanks for the work you're doing. And yeah, like try to be better. And that was a pretty good life lesson, right? About how not only are we as journalists holding organizations accountable, but the public also holds us accountable. And in that case, when I made a mistake and been held accountable by many people, admitting that and owning it was really the right way to go. You guys can still hear me okay? In the back row? Yeah. The title for this lecture was, the Beyond the Verdict, Why This Case Matters. And I think it matters for a couple different reasons. First, it matters because it's led to a number of hidden secrets and uncomfortable truths being made public. So before this trial began, the Canadian public had no idea that Hockey Canada, for years and years and years, had maintained a slush fund to pay off sexual assault allegations. The existence of this fund was kept off the books. It was a secret. And it was paid for, this slush fund was built using minor hockey registrations. So hockey families across Canada were contributing to this fund that the organization was using to get rid of bad news. It was using non-disclosure agreements to where people were coming forward to making sure that they didn't do anything that would tarnish the brand of Hockey Canada. And it was a stark example of how institutions in Canada still fight to preserve secrecy and protect their image. For generations, hockey's unwritten rule has been protect the team. And you see this in all kinds of ways, like some benign. If you've ever been in a junior hockey or a pro hockey team dressing room, they'll often have the crest of the team on a carpet in the middle of the room, and the players will all know we don't step on the carpet. And if you ask these players why, they'll give you a wide-eyed stare and say, oh, I don't really know, we just don't do that. Protect the team, don't ask questions. This is how it's always been. And one way that, that I saw this, and I wrote about it in this book, in 2005, I recently interviewed a player named Akeem Aliou. And Akeem, his career was sidelined by racism. He was a victim of racism again and again and again. Akeem's father is from Nigeria and his mother is from Ukraine. And he was an amazing hockey prospect. Amazing. One of the leading scorers in his first year in the Ontario Hockey League, playing with Windsor. And when he was in Windsor in his first year, Akeem and the other first-year players were told that they were going to go through an initiation called the Hot Box. And for people who don't know what that is, he and the other first-year players were told to strip on a team bus on a road trip and go to the back of the bus and all jam together inside the bathroom, so an area that's, anybody who's been on a charter bus knows, very small. And once they were in this bathroom, the lights were turned off and there were coins put through the vent, and they were told they could only leave if they got $3.25 in change. And of course the joke is that the players who put the coins in only put in $1.50 or something. So the first time Akeem did this, and he agreed to do it, he said, I'm only going to do it, I'll do it, but I'm only going to do it in my underwear. So he did it. And the next time he was told, you're doing it again, and this time you're going to get naked. And he said no. And he wound up getting in a fist fight with a teammate named Steve Downey. And this is all covered in the media. You can go back and look in the Windsor newspapers back in 2005 about how it was covered. Anyways, his dad brought this to the team and said unacceptable, and there was an investigation. And there wound up being suspensions, both to Akeem, because there was a fight over this, and to Steve Downey, the guy who was pressuring him to do this. But how the story ends is interesting. Steve Downey, who is white, was allowed to return and play for Canada at the World Juniors the same year. And a Hockey Canada official said, well, water under the bridge, we shouldn't hold this against him forever. Let's let him get on with his life. And Akeem Aliou, who was black, his invitation to play for Canada at a U17 international tournament was rescinded. His career was derailed, and he faced racism again and again, both in junior and then later as a professional. And so I think that's a really stark illustration of how hockey has been. Hakeem and his family put up their hands and said, no, this is wrong, and look at how he was treated by Hockey Canada. Any questions so far? I hate public speaking, so sorry. But I hate it, but at the same time, this kind of conversation has to happen. Because if it doesn't, like, we're gonna be back here again. And this isn't, I didn't write this down, but like, one of the points of this book is Sheldon Kennedy, for those who don't know him, he came out in the 1990s. He played junior hockey in Western Canada, and he was sexually assaulted by his coach more than 300 times. And when he came out with the story in 1996, the Canadian government, provincial governments, hockey organizations, everyone threw up their hands and said, never again. We have to fix the system. We have to make it safe for young boys and girls to play hockey. We have to get this right. Well, guess what happened? All these promises of reform, the news cycle, newspapers, television channels, before long there was a new shiny bright object, a new story for them to look at, and the organizations were like, oh, thank God, the media is like, they've moved on. So hockey organizations moved on. The federal government moved on. All the funding that was promised for education and background screening, gone. And so, you know, as uncomfortable as I am doing public speaking like this, I'd rather be back doing more reporting. The public has to know about this. We have to hold, as journalists, and hopefully the public, we have to hold these organizations accountable. Because even today, and I'm skipping through this a little bit, I'll come back to it, even today, even with all the progress that's been made, and there has been some progress made, I reported a story last week about a team in Stoney Creek, Ontario. It's a U14 team. And I felt uncomfortable. We went through the same process, is this in the public interest, etc. And you know, a national network covering a U14 team might sound a little bit off, it did to me. But on this team, this season, the players had a group chat, and I've seen the group chat on Snapchat, this app, and it's full of racist and homophobic slurs and pictures. What was happening in the locker room of that team was horrible. These boys they had several of the boys on the team standing at the door of the locker room, guarding it, making sure no coaches or anybody else was coming in. And these boys were pinning down their teammates, pulling their pants and underwear down, taking pictures of their genitals, and posting it on their group chat. And the coach, a complaint was made about this. The boys were told, don't do it again. The coach was told, you've got to be in the room. So there's no accountability. My point in telling you the story, when Hockey Canada made that ruling after its investigation, it was kept secret. Hockey Canada today does not believe that the right of parents and to know who they're dropping their kids off with, that right does not trump the right of privacy of somebody who's had due process and been sanctioned for misconduct. And in this case, the coach was sanctioned because one of Hockey Canada's rules is if you coach, they have what's called the rule of two, where two adult coaches have to be in the room at all times when there's players in there. So there was the coaches weren't held accountable, the kids weren't held accountable, the investigator, who basically did nothing on this case, was not held accountable. Hockey Canada wasn't held accountable because it wanted to keep this case a secret. The only reason I found out about it is the process is if you appeal, a complainant or a respondent can appeal a decision that Hockey Canada's investigators make, and it goes to an agency called the Sport Dispute Resolution Center, and that agency makes its decisions public. So my point is, if there had been no appeal in that case, no one's the wiser. So if you have any parents here, again, you guys all look like you're not old enough to have kids yet, most of you, but you will, and your kids will be in minor hockey, and if this happens, your right to know who you're dropping off your son or daughter with to play hockey, the right of somebody who's been sanctioned is above that right, above your right to know, according to Hockey Canada. Now, Hockey Canada will say, yeah, but litigation, like if we publicize people's names, it might come back at us, we could be exposed. And to that, I would say, and I have said, oh, that's interesting. Athletics Canada makes all these records public. Soccer Canada makes these records public. Swim Canada makes these records public. Even provincial organizations like the Ontario Volleyball Association make these records public. So tell me again how you can't because of litigation possibilities. Anyways, that's just like another modest role of what I'm doing right now as a journalist. I'll just jump back to this. I think that this trial in London was also important because it shattered a myth that skill on the ice, skill of an athlete, equals character off of the ice. And again, there were so many ripples of this case, and I've kind of screwed myself up here because I jumped all over the place, but the ripple effect of this case, right? It's not, organizations across sports do not want to be the ones who are in the spotlight. And so we are seeing, I can tell you, I call a CEO of a sport organization today, and I know the response is like, oh God, are we buttoned down? Are we good? And if EM in this case doesn't follow through with that trial in London, I don't think any of this happens. I think it still just goes away, like it did for decades. So that's been an important development. It's important to point out, though, that there is good news, and there has been positive change. For starters, Hockey Canada now does a much better job of vetting players who are in the national team pool. It used to do no background checking, and now it does. Hockey Canada has they call it an ITP, an independent third-party complaint process. So when you do want to make a complaint to Hockey Canada, people who are independent receive the complaint and investigate it to see if it has merit, and it didn't used to be that way. It's still not perfect for the reasons I talked about with transparency with decisions. I think the case is also important because it's really opened a conversation, like reopened a conversation nationally about issues of consent. I hear my friends and my friend circle in Toronto talking to their kids about this now. That didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago. In the days after these players in this case were charged, in January 2024, I agreed to write a book about this. Not only do I hate public speaking, I hate writing. And so why not write a book? But I just thought, I wanted to dig into the question of how did we get here? How did 11 men come in and out of that hotel room with the young woman? And how did how did not one of these young men say, this doesn't feel right? This is off. And I talked to my kids about it, my 2 sons. I talked with them a lot about it, and then decided this is a book. This book has to be written. A lot of the stories in here are historical, but they need to be documented. They need to be memorialized. They all need to be in one place where the public can find them. And I kind of wondered, well, maybe it's possible that what's happened in London, maybe this is an outlier. And so I just started doing some digging, and again, my email box has never stopped, but I'll just give you a brief summary of some of the things that people have reached out to me about, just with respect to hockey, just since 2022, when I started reporting in this case. So in October 2023, I was contacted by a family who shared that, a mom, who shared that during the 2021-2022 season, her son, who played on a U15 AAA team in Gatineau, Quebec, she shared with me that she and her son are Black, that he was forced to the ground in the team dressing room by a teammate who pressed his knees on the player's neck, and that when the organization found out about it, neither it nor the Hockey Association in Quebec reported any of this to the police. An investigation later commissioned by Hockey Canada found that players on this team were calling this young man a slave and told him to go work in a cotton field. We're using Nazi salutes to celebrate goals. And again, no accountability. Hockey Quebec did an investigation and completely buried it. April 2024, the RCMP arrested and charged 3 teenagers in Manitoba with sexual assault relating to a hazing incident. Those charges were stayed in 2025, excuse me. September 2024, 4 coaches were charged with sexually assaulting boys. Hockey Canada, in at least 3 of those, kept the results of investigations private. November 2024, a former Quebec major junior player named Gabriel Gagne was convicted of sexual assault in a Quebec courtroom. He was 28 at the time. He'd met a woman in 2016 at a party and raped her in the basement of that party. December 2024, another coach in Western Canada charged with sexual assault. March 2025, coach of 7-year-olds in Woodstock, Ontario, charged with assaulting a referee. Same month, March 2025. The Peel Police confirmed they're investigating an allegation by a woman. She was sexually assaulted by 8 players with the Mississauga Steelheads in 2014 in a billet home. Same month, March 2025. 2 ex-junior hockey players headed to jail. Victoriaville Tigers players, and I was in court as well in Quebec City for every day of this trial. Well, I didn't get to a trial, but for the pre-trial. Nicholas Degg and Massimo Siciliano, on the eve of their trial, they pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a young woman in a hotel room following a team championship. June 2025, the owner of a clever super league, is like an elite league for kids who are 5 to 9, charged with sexual assault. He was also a billet parent of one of his players. July 2025, Noah Corson, son of an NHL star, sentenced to 2 years less a day in jail for sexually assaulting a 15-year-old. 2 of his former junior teammates, who were minors, previously pleaded guilty in youth court to sexual assault. My point is, this is not a bug. There's a systemic issue here. And I've got the receipts to prove it. Some years ago, the Canadian Hockey League was sued by a group of players who alleged they were sexually abused as players. And this case is still ongoing. And one of the things that the league did to try to fight back on this was appoint a commission, a 3-member commission, to investigate this and find out, well, what's happening currently. So one of the guys they actually hired was, one of the people they hired was Sheldon Kennedy. Another one was Danielle Sauvageau, who was just inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame this week. She's a former hockey player for Canada and a former police officer. And so this committee connects with a market research firm named Leger out of Montreal. And Hockey Canada, the Canadian Hockey League gives this 3-member panel specific instructions. One, when you're looking into cases and you want to find answers to what the climate and the culture is in the game, you can only go back 4 years. You are not allowed to go back any further than that. You may not ask anyone about sexual misconduct. So interesting parameters. I'm not sure why the CHL would want an investigation limited like that. But nevertheless, Leger interviewed over 650 players, parents, coaches, people in the game, deeply in the game, about what the culture is. And of those 650 respondents, 45% of the players they spoke to, almost half, said that they were aware of issues of bullying, harassment, and maltreatment in the CHL just in the last 4 years that had never been reported in the media. So don't take my word for it that there are systemic issues in hockey. Look at the CHL Commission study, which says there's issues in junior hockey now that should be confronted. There's been a lot of blowback to this reporting, both, if I'm honest, both by colleagues and kind of in the community at large. I get social media messages all the time from people wishing bad things on me, wishing that my son would get cancer again, like crazy stuff. And you know, it's easy to say, well, just ignore it, like put it over there, it's not real, there's no accountability because the person's not using their real name. It's still not great to read. But also I can see this is part of the bargain, right? I don't do what I do to be liked. I don't do what I do to have a lot of followers on Twitter or X or Instagram or anything like that. I do what I do because it's in the public interest and because we have to have a check on powerful institutions like Hockey Canada. And the fact is, like, I'm not nearly the only journalist. There's journalists who do way heavier lifting, covering the White House and politics, covering former stories like this of sexual misconduct. One that jumps out at me, in 2001, the Boston Globe did a lot of reporting about allegations against Catholic priests in the city of Boston. And that story was turned into a movie called Spotlight that you might have seen. And at the time that they did this reporting, the reaction from the church, there was a cardinal in Boston named Cardinal Law, who called for the wrath of God to come down on the media for doing the reporting. There were people within the church, there were threats of lawsuits, there was reaction from people in Boston saying, well, why do you have to focus on the bad stories? Why can't you focus on all the good things that the church does? There was a prominent priest in Boston who suggested that the 14, 15, 16-year-old victims were the ones who were seducing the priests, and they should be held accountable. So my point in sharing that is, when you tell an uncomfortable truth, you're going to have people push back. And in the same way that it happened in Boston with the church, it happens today with hockey in Canada. Rick, why can't you be like Elliot Friedman? Why can't you focus on all the good stories in hockey? Look at all the people who are doing great things. It's an amazing game. And they're right, it is an amazing game. I love it. I play hockey 3 times a week. Some of my best friends are hockey. The support that my family received when my son was sick was, our hockey community was around us, and it was fantastic. But that does not take away from the fact that there's systemic issues in this amazing game that have to be confronted. Did I have it? Is that the right time?
Yeah, you're good.
I think I'm actually kind of close to done. I don't want to belabor it, and everybody's actually paying attention, which is amazing. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments or want to, talk about this for a couple of minutes? Hey.
Yeah. Thank you for coming in. Firstly, I really appreciated everything you shared. My first question for you is, do you think the root of all these systemic issues is the culture of hockey itself, or the actual institutions like Hockey Canada or other leagues across the nation?
Well, I think, that's a great question. So one of the things I talk about in this book is the commercialization of minor hockey. And what started as this beautiful thing where parents were going in and volunteering and coaching their kids, not really knowing the rules. It's been corrupted to its very core, because parents now, when their kids are 10 and 11, are buying into the dream that their kid has a shot at the NHL. And they're taking, hockey's now a 12-month sport. I see kids in Toronto all the time walking into a rink with $1,400 worth of sticks in their hands, and they're not teenagers yet. Kids are doing tournaments, like I said, all year round. They've got coaches for edge work, they've got coaches for shooting. It's so specialized now. So it starts there. But then the way that our system in Canada in junior hockey works is that I don't know how this is still seen to be a good idea, but we take 14, 15, 16-year-old boys and we say, okay, well, you're going to move away from your family now and you're going to go live with the Village family 300 miles away, and it's going to be great, right? And so they play on a team, and I've talked with a number of men who are 14 years old going away to play Junior B before they went to play in the OHL. And when they're think about yourself when you're 14 and your teammate in that room is 20, right? In what world is that healthy, right? But these players, they all talked about, the through line was how much they love hockey. But they're rookies, in the Canadian Hockey League, so the Ontario Hockey League, the London Knights, for instance, and they go into a setting, and I saw this firsthand at a playoff game this past year. They're playing for the London Knights, and they're going into a building where men my age, men in their 50s, are wearing the hockey jerseys of 17-year-old boys, right? And they're feeling so much pressure to be accepted by the veteran players on the team, and the veteran players on the team sometime can be amazing influences and can guide these younger players away from making errors in judgment and say, like, that's not how we do it here. And that happens. But it also happens where you have 20-year-olds who aren't like that, who don't have a moral compass, who are saying, okay, we've got a rookie party, you're gonna bring 3 girls to the party for me to meet, right? I wanna hear all the stories of you hooking up. One of the stories in this book is about a Brock University professor in 2021 who had a player come into his room, his office at Brock in St. Catharines, and talk to him about how disturbed he was by his hockey experience, because the expectation on his junior team was that when you hook up with a girl and are having sex with her, that you use your phone and take a picture without her knowing and post it on the group chat. Right? And I'm not saying this is every hockey player, but it's happening enough that it's clearly systemic issues. So I think that's the root of it, right? Kate Dubinsky's in the room from CBC, awesome journalist, and Kate did a story in the spring during this trial covering Hockey Canada. The Ontario Hockey League will trumpet the claim that all of its teams have consent training. So all these players have, somebody from the community with a gender-based violence organization comes in and talks to them, right? Well, Kate's reporting pierced that myth, right? She documented that that's actually not happening in every market. But as I said earlier, the media is being hollowed out. So who in London, who in North Bay, who in Sault Ste. Marie is holding these teams to account, saying, you're saying that you have this consent training, but one, you're not doing it at all. Maybe you're just box ticking. And that's another thing I found during the reporting. There are some teams that they think that having somebody come in and talk to their players for 60 minutes every September is more than enough, right? There's other teams, like the Peterborough Petes, that I think are leaders in this space. In Peterborough, the Petes have a guy named Luke Ben Belson, who doesn't play hockey, but he has unfettered access to the players. He's in there all the time, at their practices, after their games, connecting with them. And it's sort of the same as like doing what I do. Reporting is all about trust building, right? If I'm asking you, tell me about the worst day of your life, tell me about what you're looking for, if you and I have just met, chances are it's going to take some work to get you there. And why would it be any different in hockey, right? Why would a 16-year-old boy confide with somebody that they met for an hour in September about what's going on in their locker room? So there's a path forward. I think the Petes are showing one way to help players learn to become the best versions of themselves as they're becoming young men. Long answer. Correct. Hey.
TSN obviously built from differences of the home hockey. Reporting on sexual violence within the sport is a stark departure from the typical coverage that do day to day. Reflecting on your reporting, is there anything you wish TSN did differently when covering such a complex issue that's so different from what they could do?
Is there anything you as a viewer wishes we would do differently?
Well, I think as a hockey player myself, growing up, I've obviously seen a lot of things you have talked about today, and I think that we think about this more as, oh, these are a few bad players, and I think an issue that I kind of had with it is we're focusing on these, 5, 6 players who were discussed in court, but a part of me also thinks that Hockey Canada was able to use these as a shield, these players, and say, these are bad people, and we made a mistake. I think that personally TSN should have focused a lot more on Hockey Canada itself, and obviously there are these players were bad people for what they did. Do you think that they should have put more pressure on Hockey Canada itself?
I think that, I think there's been a lot of pressure on Hockey Canada. Like I said, their sponsors have walked away. Their entire board was fired. Their CEO was fired. It's a new, the people at Hockey Canada are all new. So they have, in my opinion, they've been held accountable, and there's been a lot of hard reporting on that organization. And still, like I was saying, I'm still, this whole issue of secrecy, I'm still, my job, and I like the people at Hockey Canada now, but I'm still going to hold them accountable for that, because that's the job. I don't know, I maybe agree to disagree with you on that. I think that there has been a really good level of media holding that organization accountable. But I also at the same time, I think the way that you put it about, so much attention, maybe not just by TSN, but by everybody, on the bad judgment of, and how gross it was with those 5 players were involved with.
12 players,
Thank you, Kate.
or 11, 5
Yeah.
were charged.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Did you watch the trial very closely?
I did keep up to date with the trial.
Tell me what your perspective was as you saw things unfold.
I think for me, I kind of take it as 2 lenses. One is how I view this as a law student and what is the issues within law itself, and then I see this in a social context. And within talking to my friends who play hockey, I think a big issue is that no one was really able to understand what was going on. I think that the message was clear that what was done was horrific, but I think that a lot of hockey players see this and say, wow, that was bad. But there isn't an actual way for, I think, the general public to fully understand the ramifications or solution of this problem. I think this leaves us with a very open-ended question of, okay, this went to court, we can't do this, obviously, and this is a terrible thing. But it also leaves a lot of players kind of questioning, like, now you're in the spotlight, people are kind of scared to come up. I know a lot of players who've been subjected to terrible things, and they're saying, now this is going to become a very big spectacle. They're scared to come. So how would you say going forward, do you think media and sexual assault in sport should kind of deal with this? Because there is now a bit of trepidation of the spotlight as well.
I love that you and I are just interviewing each other. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. People are afraid, right? Putting your hand up and saying this is wrong is never comfortable. I don't have an answer to that, honestly. I have so many questions about this case. Like, effectively, there was 2 mistrials in this case because of how the defense lawyers acted. And I still, to this day, wonder how that case would have resulted if a jury had the power to make a decision and a verdict. There were things about the rules of evidence. You guys are all law students. I don't understand it. You had a player who was not charged named Brett Howden in that case, who, after what happened in that hotel room, sent an email to one of his Team Canada teammates, a message, a player named Taylor Radish, saying he was so glad he left the room when he did, because when he did, Dylan Dubé, his words, was smacking that girl's ass so hard it hurt. And the judge decided that correspondence between these 2 players was not admissible. I don't understand the rules of evidence, but why would that not be admissible? I still don't understand that. Right? The same player, Brett Howden, when he spoke to the Hockey Canada investigators, said that he saw EM weeping in that hotel room. And that, to me, that's always stuck out because weeping is a very specific word. It's not crying or very specific. I'm curious, before I ask anybody else, I'm curious, did you play junior?
No, I did not play junior, but most of my friends did.
Okay, so you're still in the hockey world, you've still got buddies who play. One of the central parts of this trial was the role that these 2 consent videos played, a 6-second and a 14-second video. And the players were acquitted, and not only that, the judge declared in this case that she found that there was consent. I'm wondering if you've talked to your friends, or what you think their perspective might be on filming consent videos moving forward.
My perspective is that it doesn't make sense to film with consent, because consent, if it were to be on film, you'd have to consent to film, but also there is so many underlying factors to when someone brings a camera out. It seems like there's forced consent, and then previously, in another discussion on this topic, we discussed that consent is consistent and ongoing, so that means you have to videotape the whole thing. I think that there's been cases I'll show that, like in Canada, consent using a camera, or to say after the fact, should never really play any evidence. I think that a lot of hockey players, especially in modern day, and athletes do use cameras to try to prove a lot of things, but that does not change the fact of if there was consent, and I don't think it should be applied or considered when looking at consent of a sexual act, especially with professional athletes.
It's interesting, this case in Quebec that I covered, I interviewed the victim in that case, and she told me that she and a colleague at the hotel, this was the young woman who was sexually assaulted by these 2 Quebec major junior players, and she said that when she went to she and her colleague went to his room to confront him on this. And they had a conversation sort of in the doorway of the hotel room. And then this hockey player had his cell phone like in his pocket of his shirt. And it was clear he was recording and telling her like, yeah, but you said that you wanted this to happen. He's trying to get the angle right on the video. And he's saying to her, like, this happens all the time, right? This is a hockey story. It happens all the time. It's what happens. Just file a lawsuit. We'll settle it. You'll get some money out of this. So, I don't know. I'm curious. I really, and it speaks to, it also speaks to what we talked about media. Like, why are no media anywhere covering junior hockey across Canada with 60 major junior teams, hundreds of junior A teams, let alone other teams at the junior level? Is there a single reporter in a country of 40 million people that's asking questions of players about what their perspective is on consent after a trial like this? I haven't found one story. How is that possible?
Well, you also don't get access to them, right? They don't, like, the London Knights will not give us access to any of those kids.
I think this is.
I had a question, just to build on the question from the back about the culture. And I really appreciated your whole talk, and especially that you looked at kind of homophobia and racism. And I think what's implicit, but I wonder if you talk about it a bit more, is misogyny and sexism and treating women like objects, because that's out in the culture. It's in a lot of mainstream pornography. It breeds that sense of male entitlement, male bonding. Not for all men, of course, but it seems to be particularly embedded in some sports cultures, and I wondered if that's that kind of masculine aggression, if that's something that is a theme.
Yeah. Well, and I mentioned the Peterborough Petes and the consent training that they do and how they kind of do it differently. And in Kitchener, one of the people that work with the Kitchener Rangers, I interviewed him and talked about this too. And he made that point. He talked about like the pervasiveness, and this is, as a father, this is one of the things I've talked to my boys about a lot. Pornography now is pervasive. It's everywhere. You can't escape it. And in Canada, we don't have like adult verifications like some countries are moving towards now, but it's everywhere. And this Kitchener Rangers person I spoke to, again, he's one of the people who does this training with players. What are kids seeing nowadays? Like in porn, he told me that there's like choking, spitting, all of this, and kids, they're learning behavior from what they see on their phones, right? And it's, as a dad, as a parent, it's so uncomfortable, that conversation. Like to talk to my boys, hey guys, we're gonna talk about porn now. Like that's not a fun conversation. But that, again, that's the bargain. If you want to have kids and be a dad, that's the conversation you have to have with your sons, in my opinion. And daughters too. And so, like to your point, that's a real thing. Like a lot of these young guys, and I said I interviewed 58 players for this book. Andrew Tate, who I really didn't know anything about. So many of these young men look up to, they have role models like this, right? Where they believe that young women belong to guys. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, the point you were making with pornography and the link to domestic violence is very real. My question was, just as guilty or supposedly guilty were those 5 guys, were the 5 or 6 players who saw what was going on in that room and turned around and left. And what I think we've got to get through to is the people who see things like that happening, and they've got to come forward. Like you say in the book, these kids are put on a pedestal when they're very young, and they think they can do whatever they want. But what we've got to do is we've got to get not only to the people who obviously are doing these violent acts, but the people who see it going on and don't do anything about it. I think you mentioned that in the book as well.
I do. I did an interview with Carol, with PHF Padai on CBC this weekend. And I actually shared with her a story of dropping off my younger son at Guelph this year for his first year of school. And I said to him, okay, my expectation of you is that you will be a protector of women, right? If you see something at a party and there's a girl and it looks like it just doesn't, you'll know, like it just won't feel right. It's not enough for you to not be involved. It's not enough for you to be like, I don't want any part of that. You have to go and you have to say to her, be okay. and wait for her to say yes before you, leave it alone. And I think that's, I would hope that that would be every parent's expectation of their young boys.
I know a lot of current OHL players, and I know their parents, and there's a direct relation between the attitude of the parent and of the son.
Yeah.
Like friends of mine are currently on the London Knights, or their sons are on the London Knights, and these kids would not get involved in anything close to what happened in that room.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, one question I have is registration in hockey is down 30 or 40% across Canada. And I'm wondering if bringing these stories forward is discouraging potential parents that put the kids into minor hockey. That's
100%. Yeah, 1,000%. And Hockey Canada knows this. Like, it has to get this right because its future is on the line.
like there's the cost of minor hockey, which
It's-
is discouraging for parents.
Yeah.
Do I spend $10,000 a year to play? That, like you mentioned, that Clever League in Toronto that Chris Versteeg has started.
Yes.
$8,000 to $10,000 for your 6-year-old to play hockey is ridiculous. Like people are buying soccer shoes and basketballs as opposed, a lot cheaper. That's discouraging people from hockey as well.
I mean, you often hear people say, oh, demographically, Canada's changing. Canada's already changed. Like, look at, our country. It's one of the things I love most about Canada is how diverse it is, right? Like, at TSN, we should be leaning into that. We should be showing more volleyball, cricket. Like, we are so focused, and there's a camera, great, amazing. We're so focused on hockey, and I really wish that, we took some chances on
I've got
other
a spelling
sports.
bee on there sometimes, I notice.
To your point that these other sports are growing, and this brought my mind to professional women's sports. So, or just the professionalization of sports. I think everything that we're seeing with Hockey Canada is a bit of a reminder of what happens when we put pressure on our kids to become these professional athletes. And when there is this sort of road to success, that there's all of a sudden that there's all this like entitlement, as Mr. Randall pointed to, but then also protection by those sport organizations in order to protect the careers of young viable athletes. So knowing that the professionalization of certain sports is occurring in Canada, and that's a really exciting thing. Like, what would you point to as something for other sports that are excited that this is growing and that this is happening? It is a great thing, but and especially for there to be ideally, more equitable options for women participating in sports as a career. What are this is like, we have all these issues to address immediately that should have been addressed decades ago. But if we could get ahead of it for these other emerging organizations, do you have any thoughts on that?
None real smart ones. But I mean, women's sports, the reality is, like, if there's other options for everybody now, right? For sponsor, look at Canadian Tire. Mm-hmm. Canadian Tire was a long-time Hockey Canada sponsor. They're like, when this all happened, they're like, we're done, we're out, we're gone. And now they sponsor the PWHL. Mm-hmm. Now you have the NSL, right? The WNBA is coming to Toronto as well. So the pie of money in corporate Canada is not like growing like this. It's static. And so in terms of market share, that's the other pressure. Like, how many stories are there where it's like, well, follow the money? This isn't a way follow the money story. Because the organization, like Hockey Canada, if they don't get it right, they're going to lose sponsors, they're going to lose participants. And I think that pressure is a great thing. I think it's great that there's more women's sports. Hi.
So I know we've been talking about how there's like this big issue in hockey, and like I'm a big follower of the NHL, and I know the NHL is one of the only major sports league that does not have like a formal sexual assault or domestic violence policy. And I remember earlier in the season too, like I think it was Mark Lazarus was asking a question to like Vegas about potentially signing Carter Hart, and he had his media pass revoked because of it. So I was just curious, like, what are your thoughts on like moving this to the next step and having like actual implications on a bigger scale? Because we see that there is this issue clearly still.
Well, what would that look like to you? What do you mean on a bigger scale?
Well, like for me, like I said, I would ideally like to see some sort of policy from the NHL or NHLPA on like domestic violence and sexual assault and how to handle cases when players have been involved in that. Because again, there's no guidelines, so it feels very arbitrary right now how it's handled. Yeah, like I don't know how we can kind of push the movement forward.
Yeah, good point. There was just a little, I think a couple of weeks ago, there was an assistant coach with the Washington Capitals
Yeah,
who's been suspended because of an allegation of domestic abuse.
yeah.
So, I mean, there may not be a policy, maybe they still are doing, they're not, I don't know, I don't know what I think about that. I think, why not have a policy? Like, I guess the question I would ask with the NHL is, take the win, right? Develop a policy, have smart people write it, and then stand by it and make sure that people are held accountable. What's the reason why they wouldn't, what do you think the reason is why they wouldn't have a policy?
I am honestly not sure at this point because I feel like ever since this trial, especially shed a lot of light on it, it's the perfect chance for them to jump in and be like, we realize in the past we haven't handled this well, but like here we are making amends. I don't know, maybe if they're afraid of pushback because there still are a lot of like older, I think predominantly male hockey fans that like really push back on like hockey becoming too woke and like
It wasn't only men. There's
Yeah.
a lot of women.
yeah, like I think
We're
there are a
chiming
lot
in.
of fans that are more rooted and would push back, but
Hmm.
I personally don't really see how there would be a downside to just having a formal policy and like making sure things are addressed.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Isn't there a policy that they were suspended until the end of the court case, and then
That
when
was
they were found not guilty somehow, they were allowed to play?
That
That's
was
the policy.
the commissioner though, like there's no formal.
They still can't play for Hockey Canada though, right? So it's fine.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you're right. It seemed very arbitrary.
Yeah.
Like the
Like
Gary
it's just
Bettman
that
and the
it's
PA.
suppression, essentially.
Hi.
I think I know why they haven't formed a policy. It's all about money, right?
Yes.
What if one of the star players got involved in domestic violence, and they had to impose the penalty? And that's not a good reason, but I think that is the reason.
I think this lady just wants. Hi.
Yeah, I just actually was wondering about something similar to that. There was an op-ed in the Globe and Mail a few weeks ago that I was reading that made like pretty high level argument that the issue is like winning in general. And so as long as professional sports are centered on winning and you need to win to make money, there won't be any accountability in terms of moral issues like domestic violence or sexual violence. It was in relation to Carter Park being signed.
Right.
Or playing. And I was wondering like, I mean, I think that's a pretty extreme position. I don't know if we need to like abolish sports completely.
What do you think? What do you think about Carter being signed in Vegas?
I think it's difficult because he was acquitted, so
Okay.
it's tough to like make, I think, a legal argument that he should be banned from having a career. But
As a fan, do you have an emotional perspective on it?
I don't watch hockey.
Okay.
So I followed the trial really closely.
Right.
And like the case I've been following very closely.
Right.
But I don't watch hockey at all. I moved to basketball, so that's
Okay.
completely, yeah, a different universe. But if I was a hockey fan, I think I'd feel really upset. Like, it is a case that triggers, I think, a lot of like high emotions from a lot of people for many reasons. It's pretty horrific, I think, what I heard every day, seeing the trial and reading about it. But yeah, I guess like, I'm wondering like what you think the middle ground there is, like how do we get to a point where like professional sports are corporations that need to make money? Is there a line where they need to prioritize morals over money? What is that line? How do they get there?
I would imagine that there's gotta be some like government sort of concern overreach for the NHL to start controlling contract agreements between the teams and the players, and then the collective bargaining or the NHL Players Association. Like I feel like I would be curious if there was more pressure, how much they would be willing to do that. And I agree that there's probably just a cost assessment behind this to a certain degree that would maybe push someone over the line of deciding, how much control they do want to assert if they've been providing their teams mostly control over who they get to, you know, sign deals with.
What were you gonna say?
Oh, I had 2 questions for you.
Oh.
First of all, how's your son doing now?
Oh, so Carter's great. He'll be 5 years cancer-free, so in remission, like in May, so we're gonna have like a end of days party to celebrate, my family and I, and yeah, so thanks for asking.
Excellent. Coming back to the case really started with this fund that Hockey Canada had, and that people were surprised, parents were upset. That's what the MPs in Parliament were talking about, was
Right.
how could this money be put aside? And as the case progressed, it became more and more focused on the 5, on EM. I think because it's a more salacious story, right? This was actually about sex and sexual assault in a hotel room with names of people we know. And the focus came away from the finances and the accounting and the bookkeeping of Hockey Canada. How do you think it got away from that center point originally? And is there a way that it could be more focused on, because if it stayed at that original spot, then that's Hockey Canada, and not just individual players, but the institution of Hockey Canada.
I don't think that the outrage was over the fact that there was a fund. I think actually it's a good thing there's a fund. There should be compensation for people who've been hurt. The issue with that fund is that it was secret. It was off the books. I was paying into it as a hockey parent. All the hockey parents across Canada were paying into it. And there must have been a reason why Hockey Canada kept it secret, right? Because to publicize it, they would have to start talking about how often they were making payments out. And if they start talking about how often they're making payments out, then we have a clearer picture on how pervasive this is, right? So to me, that was the story. Yeah, and you're right. Like, there's the stories about what specifically happened in that room, the allegations, and the way it played out in court. You used the word salacious. That's fair. And that's, I think, human nature to follow stories like that. It's the reason why true crime podcasts are the most popular podcasts now, right? Those are more interesting to people, generally speaking, than a policy story on Hockey Canada. But, I mean, I'm committed to still reporting on Hockey Canada and on that policy, and, you know, and on, like I've talked ad nauseum about transparency, so I'm still on top of it. Miss?
I'm just curious to know, through your research and reporting, what do you think are the biggest barriers that prevent people from actually reporting their experiences? Because I think with every incident that you tell us, I think there's so much more that people don't actually report and get to that stage.
Well, if you think about what we heard in this case through testimony, the first investigating officer in this case, right, which in the interview happened 3 days after, you know, the alleged sexual assault, he collected physical evidence. He collected EM's clothing and did not send it for forensic testing. He obtained video surveillance from Jack's bar and did not watch it. He didn't interview any players he closed his investigation after doing 4 interviews out of the entire team, 2 of those interviews in person. And all this came out during the trial.
He also said to her in the interview that it sounds like you consented.
He asked
Like,
me.
he didn't understand the law of consent. Like,
So-
it's shocking.
So my point, I guess what I would say is, if you're listening to what's happening in this case, and you've been hurt, why would you trust the police? And maybe that's one of the reasons why so few people who go through experiences like this go to the police. And I mean, I think if this isn't a learning opportunity for police forces across Canada, what is? In the back? Hey.
Thank you so much for your talk. My question maybe builds off of Melanie's and actually follows nicely with your answer to this question. But people have been talking about like going up levels, and I wonder where the story of toxic masculinity is in this whole course you don't go to the police, they have the same kind of institutional problems as hockey, you know, the RCMP, the Army, all of these institutions that are male institutions where it's men on top, men they're like, that's where we see these problems like over and over again. So I'm curious in your sort of comments and thoughts and research where this much bigger question of kind of society's acceptance of, you know, behavior like this or institutions that are historically so male where toxic masculinity is so present, how do you kind of get around that? Because certainly having an hour a year or 5 hours a year or somebody who comes every day like in Peterborough to talk to the students about consent is helpful, but that seems so radically insignificant compared to the problem. So yeah, I'm curious how you see going bigger than even the NHL.
It feels like a big ship in the ocean and trying to turn it, right? Like, I don't know how. Like, I knew with this book, which I hope at least one person will buy today, because again, I'm not making any money off this book. I knew that if I called this "We Breed Lions" inside the toxic culture of hockey in Canada, I knew it's going to turn people off, and they'll be like, woke. So I was like, no, we're not calling this toxic culture, we're going to go with troubled culture, because that will, maybe hockey people will be more open to engaging with it and to look at it. I don't know the answer to your question. I know that even now, if you watch hockey broadcasts on any network, including mine, we celebrate, you know, guys playing through broken orbital bones and broken jaws and being back, and like that is what it is to be a man, right? Is to fight through pain and to leave everything on the ice or on the field or what have you. We've had a century of reporting like this. We've had a century of Hockey Night in Canada and networks and newspapers so telling us the stories about hockey being this force that binds us all together and gives us a common goal and stitches us together as a country. So as much as I'd love to see things change radically quickly, it's a big ship moving in the ocean. And you know, I do what I can modestly as one reporter, and hopefully people in here will do what they can too.
And on that note, thank you.
We're done?
Yeah, so
Thanks for listening.